Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is TJ Feltz, and I will be presenting on really two key areas around capital project performance within turnarounds. Just by way of outline, I'm going to begin by getting on some definitional terms around integration and the way the AP Networks looks at integration. I will then cover our project readiness, show how project readiness is critical to event success, and offer a couple of highlights and tips on some areas. I'll look at integration trends and practices as we go through both time and looking at the hundreds of turnarounds that we have. I'm only going to demonstrate one case study today, but I think it's powerful because it's going to really illuminate and highlight the real value in dollars that can be derived from increasing integration. Then I'm going to share some of the tools that we have around uh, solving specific problems for our clients, and then I'll offer some brief conclusions. Some key things that I'd like for you to walk away from today is I really want to highlight some key project readiness focus areas for these turnaround related projects. There's going to be three that I'll specifically look at. Um, I really want to show some effective ways of integrating projects that you can take back with you to your individual sites or at a corporate level. Uh, I really want to demonstrate why this is so important and show value through that. And finally, I want to leave you with some good recommendations that can be taken away in order to improve integration in the future. So just on in terms of definitional perspectives, a turnaround is a planned overhaul of a processing facility, generally driven by some regulatory requirement or an inspection related requirement that requires the shutting down of a facility. When we talk about integrated events, we're talking about those turnaround requirements with coinciding capital projects. The capital projects look very, very different depending on which industry we are working with, and in terms of the size and complexity of the projects. When we talk about complexity, AP Networks defines complexity looking at the total number of direct field labor hours. So those could be the construction hours associated with a project or hours associated with the traditional maintenance work or inspection work. What percentage those direct field labors are as a function of projects in the interval. So, how often the units associated with that event comes down. And really, one of the unique differentiators about AP Networks is that we have a capital projects side to us, we have a turnaround side to us, and that puts us in a unique position to lead in assisting our clients with those integrated high and mega complexity events. So Nathan's going to talk a lot about the database that we use to leverage to help really weaponize benchmarks and harness this information to make better decisions. Um, the thing that we don't really talk about all the time is each of these events that we have observations on have significant project portfolios within them. And so when we just look at the project portfolio, just looking at high complexity events, not even mega complexity events, we find that 40% of these events have more than 20% project hours. So there's a significant amount of project work taking place with these high complexity events. Two-thirds of these projects have a total project expenditure between 23 and $50 million. So maybe not just the monies expended within the turnaround window, but if you look at the total cost of these projects, there's significant investment associated with projects taking place within these events. And if we just look at the number of projects, so are they large projects? Are they small projects? Two-thirds of events have between 6 and 23. So very wide range. We're really looking at a lot of different project types that are being inserted into these events. And there's a lot of different strategies around the organization, those various areas. So now I'm going to talk a little bit around trying to align all of these different projects with a standardized turnaround work process. And if we were to look at obviously there's a large TIC associated with just these 5 projects. This is for illustrative purposes. But ideally, we would have detailed engineering for all of our projects completed at turnaround scope freeze. That's not the case, but there's a lot of other activities on the project side that need to go into being able to achieve some of those turnaround related deliverables. And what we find is that it's very challenging for industry. As a matter of fact, lack of integration we found is the number 3 reason uh, tied to outcomes within our database that aren't desirable. And when we look at those number 1 and number 2 reasons for poor turnaround outcomes, those are directly tied to project readiness. So you could see there in terms of the top 4 reasons that turnarounds fail, we've showed this a number of times. Number 3 is that direct integration and alignment piece. Numbers 1 and 2, corporate governance and oversight. There's different organizations that have oversight of these projects. Uh, it's interrelated with integration. And then inadequate scope selection obviously is tied to projects because if there's a recurring bad actor and there's a project that's not identified in time for turnaround scoping, the turnaround is going to have a scope item dedicated to that. They're going to plan for it, and there may be an idea for a project that comes in late. So all these things are interrelated, and it's very important. And they're all driven by project readiness and integration. So when we're talking about integration, specifically, what is it that we mean? We are talking about aligning capital projects to support effective execution of a turnaround. And so that does not mean just-in-time engineering. That does not mean optimizing for a small project outcome in order to be as fast and as cheap as possible. There's really a midway point in achieving those things. We look in 3 specific categories. We look at organizationally, is both the project group and the turnaround organization set up to work collaboratively and share information with one another? Is there strategic alignment? Is what the plant looks like at the conclusion of this event clear? And is it clear who is responsible for delivering what that plant looks like, whether it be project or turnaround or collaboratively? And then finally, we look at planning and preparation. So with those resources, with those goals, is there a work process and are there steps in place with the right timings to optimally deliver all of these projects and the turnaround work as efficiently as possible? So that's what we mean when we're referring to integration. The underpinnings to that are having high capital project and turnaround readiness. So if there aren't good processes and procedures in place to support projects, there aren't good processes and procedures in place to deliver good, efficient maintenance work. Before they come together, they have to be effective on their own. So we're going to look at that and really focus on the project readiness piece to start. So AP Networks has a capital project integrated readiness pyramid. And this pyramid has been in use for over 15 years. There are about 300 turnarounds that we have observations on in the pre-turnaround phase and in the post-turnaround phase that help us identify and draw conclusions about what the state of readiness is around these projects. It's important that your readiness pyramid and evaluation on these projects is tailored to an event or to a turnaround, and all of the different shaded areas within our readiness pyramid are. The reasoning for that is because there are unique requirements for these projects that require a little bit of a tailored work process. It's not business as usual for the capital projects world to deliver successful projects in an event. So all of these elements within our readiness pyramid have turnaround specific language incorporated with it. And then there are 4 specific areas where we have unique requirements from our standalone readiness pyramid. And those are in team integration, work scope, capital projects, and pre-turnaround planning. So, as always, it's important to measure what matters. And when looking at turnaround related projects, you need to be measuring the readiness of those projects uh, to be fit for purpose and tied to turnarounds. So, what we did for TINC this year is we aggregated all of the data and we looked at which areas are the most ready, which areas are the least ready. I'm going to talk through now which areas were least ready with the kind of the biggest nuggets and the biggest surprises. So out of the top 10 areas, really there are three areas that were kind of surprising. Number four overall is this organizational vertical integration. So this factor specifically looks at from the project team to the project steering team and the business or site leadership, how well aligned vertically is the organization in terms of what the expectations are for this project to deliver, what the cost and what the schedule should look like. The second one was around scope analysis, prioritization, and evaluation. So that's looking again in that unique element of work scope. And really, this is associated with timing. So, when is the scope defined for a project relative to when the turnaround is going to begin? The third element there, you've heard AP networks always be uh, very aggressive in terms of defining engineering package statuses and looking at that area. Um, engineering package status has been talked about a lot of times. But if we look at this pyramid, there's really three different areas. There's a strategic element, tactical, and execution. You would expect that the execution, kind of those last areas that get finished, would not have a good readiness, and that's all the grayed out areas. You would expect some of these foundational elements to really be well defined as we are looking at it relative to a turnaround cycle. And that's why this vertical integration piece really stands out. Same thing with defining the work scope and having that scope analyzed, prioritized, and evaluated. And then again, we've talked about engineering projects. That's one of the main things we focused on. So when we're looking at this, what's happening? And if you look at and think about project processes differential, if it's a standalone project or greenfield project relative to a turnaround related project, really there's a time component. And that time is not as readily available on turnaround related projects as it is for if it were standalone in the run and maintain atmosphere of a plant or greenfield. So, generally speaking, vertically, the organization maybe doesn't have to be as well aligned, or it's easier for the project to adapt to changes if project steering teams have like a portfolio change or they're adapting to a new environment. So, really, that timing component is critical. It's very important to ensure that vertically within the project organization and within those decision makers, they're well aligned. That will help analyze the scope and get scope landed in order to increase readiness of the entire project portfolio. So that's a critical thing coming out. We also look at processes and having projects defined. And when we looked at the readiness associated with projects, when projects are kicked off or initiated relative to turnaround timing, this is still a big challenge area. So 1/3 of all projects executed during a turnaround are still initiated within 12 months of the turnaround window. And generally speaking, it's not just, oh, this is regulatory requirement with minimum scope that we must do. These are generally discretionary. That means that there was time for the organization to think through these challenges, but because projects aren't getting identified early enough, it's degrading readiness. If projects aren't identified in time to execute the project work process, then they're introducing risk into their events. And it's not just the project organization, it's also the initiators of projects. So operations, process, business or commercial entities, site leadership teams, involves and touches a lot other people. Projects organizations aren't signing up just to do projects. They're being given an initiative to do it. And then finally, I'll just show um, so far to date, of all of the turnarounds that AP Networks has benchmarked in 2024, if projects were added after that T minus 12 month mark, they've achieved third or bottom quartile cost performance. So there's a very strong correlation between identifying projects early and achieving strong turnaround outcomes, particularly around cost. So what can be done? Kind of the inverse of what we've talked about. The most important thing is get projects identified early. It is not decision space for business entities, other organizations. Um, as soon as you identify projects early, you're not going to have the ideal outcomes, turnaround outcomes. And again, that goes to kind of goal setting and having the same strategic alignment. The next thing that you can do if you're a turnaround professional is ensure that the risk associated with your event is communicated in those vertical alignment meetings. So ensuring that it's not just a project manager thinking it's projects as usual, talking to a project leadership team. There's that added turnaround component. Because if a business or individuals are taking time to think longer and to optimize the project, they are no longer optimizing the turnaround and they're introducing risk to that event. So there's a trade-off there that takes place. That trade-off needs to be fully communicated and evaluated. Okay. And then finally, look at event-specific requirements being added into project stage gate reviews. So if you're at T minus 9 for a turnaround and you're going for final funding and you don't have a full definition of what you expect the project to look like, maybe added contingency and get into detailed engineering is better for the overall cost of the event than kicking the can down the road another month for that specific project. So that's what we're talking about there. So those are some key areas that we'd recommend when looking at project readiness. At this point in time, I'll transition over into integration. So we've talked about kind of the left-hand side of having that foundational turnaround readiness elements, project readiness elements. Now we're going to talk about integration. And so when we look at integration, we measure integration in these various areas, but we look at it on a scale of 0 to 100%, with industry average being at 54%. So generally speaking, the industry shows that there are some gaps with industry best practice. And again, I talked earlier about the organization, strategic alignment, planning and execution of the projects. The common areas that we see as challenge opportunities are really the project and turnaround organizations meeting and having different tolerances around risk. So ensuring that there's a good cadence, that there's definitions around the information being shared. During the event, what are the roles and responsibilities going to be? Who's managing construction in the field? Who's providing support and RFI support from an engineering perspective? Strategically, it's really kind of broken up into the two areas, just defining what those goals are for the event. So if a project has to be up and operational at commissioning of the unit, having those defined. Conversely, if there's a large project that's going to set the duration of the turnaround, understanding what those turnaround objectives are should be put into that project premise. And then integrating risk management. So often every project has their own individual risk register, but deciding when those risks need to be conveyed into the event risk register, how they're conveyed, how they're updated and status is important. Then on the planning and execution side, really the one on the bottom right, having those aligned, consistent planning milestones is critical and integral to ensuring that you're not then moving into the world of trade-offs where, okay, we're going to be late, but we're going to meet that project objective. And now, we've introduced the risk of a 10% cost overrun to our turnaround or to our event. That's critically important. And why is this important? As with everything else, our outcomes are correlated with positive and negative events. So if we were to walk through both the schedule and cost index, 1.00 would be the industry average. And so anything above one would be a third or bottom quartile performer. Uh, Underneath one, so less than one, would be a positive outcome. And so you can see um, relative to industry, really, once you're getting your integration index over 60%, you're performing much, much better than your competitors on a cost basis. For schedule, you may think, well, all of it is above one. Why is that? Well, events that do not have any projects or have very significantly smaller projects have better outcomes than events that have larger amount of capital projects within the window. And so that's where it accounts for it. But you can still see the trend line associated with having a higher integration index correlates to having a better schedule outcome. And that's on comparison to industry side. In terms of comparison with targets, you can see it's also correlated. So the better the integration index, the more predictable your event is going to be. So at this point in time, I want to look at, we generally perform ITAP zeros, ones, twos, threes, and fours. And this is really looking at the ITAP 1 through 4s. These are the scores of the integration indices by time. So if you just step back and look at it, the first thing is it's a downward trend. In this case, this is not good. Integration is getting worse from T minus 14 months all the way through when an event is executed. And you can see really at the T minus 14 month mark, generally speaking, things look good. There's optimism, et cetera, et cetera. So what's happening? So at the T minus 14 month mark, generally speaking, there's a solid project list. There's a good plan that's in place, and work processes are generally designed to set capital project integration up for success. So generally speaking, the plan looks good 14 months ahead of the event. By the time we get to T minus 10 months, new projects are added, and so those are behind. So that's going to degrade integration. And that plan that was in place, maybe resources shifted around due to that vertical integration, maybe ideas changed about what the project list should look like. And then those planned engineering deliverables slip. And again, you see a wide range of variability. As we come back and we look at T minus 4 months, engineering is either completed or it's getting close to getting completed. And then there's all those execution elements to work through. And so the other project deliverables, making sure the MOC completion is done, making sure that there's a good pre-turnaround construction plan, long lead materials. You start to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of how everything is going to come together. And then when we perform a look back, generally speaking, some of the optimism that was associated with we can get it done or these challenges are completed, maybe they weren't as completed or maybe the teams weren't on as close of the same sheet of music as they thought. And so those gaps really expose themselves during a look back. That's also a good reason to execute look backs to ensure that properly identifying opportunities for the future. So overall, the big message here is that integration is hard. but adding projects late and getting off plan um, makes things harder. And the good news is everybody, generally speaking, has a good plan when they start out. It's just that then, as life happens and decisions are made, it's degrading that integration overall. So, what does good look like in terms of integration index? Again, having those healthy foundations and readiness for both turnaround and project readiness, ensuring that everyone comes together early to define the objectives and having those objectives clear on both the individual projects premises and in the turnaround of the event premise. Ensuring that that work process and the risk management process are well integrated and they're reported and that information is shared in a collaborative manner. So it's not a matter of trying to use it as a shield or use it as a sword against one another. It's a way to work together to come up with good solutions. Having the right amount of people and the right experience of individuals to execute all of the work that you're trying to do is important, and understanding when and where you have shortfalls. Having the right tools in place so that way you can effectively communicate quickly with one another. Um, Having a good, thorough capital integration plan that helps set the tone and the rules for how teams are going to act with one another. And then having an escalation model that helps to drive resolution. And so when we talk about vertical integration, there's questions about, well, how is the turnaround represented on a project steering team? Or how is um, the large global project organization or central project organization associated with the turnaround steering teams or steering committees? How do they have a vote and how do they work together so that way when someone raises an issue, there's a way to actually get to effective resolution? These areas are critical and important. At this point in time, I'm going to talk through just a brief case study. And so this looks at a single facility. They engaged AP networks for one full turnaround cycle. So whether it was 6 or 7 years, they performed a turnaround pre-COVID time. They performed the same unit, same turnaround post-COVID, um, and they gained tremendous value through focusing on a couple areas. So again, they really wanted to commit themselves to turnaround excellence. And so they had a mega turnaround. It involved over 1 million total hours. There were 215,000 capital project hours. They wanted to execute, and they did execute 22 projects. Almost half of them were identified within 9 months of the turnaround occurring. They achieved a bottom quartile schedule that was 12 days slower than industry, third quartile cost, but that represented $30 million more than industry would spend, and they were wildly unpredictable. After that, organizationally, they really wanted to focus in 4 areas. And so they wanted to develop some of the building blocks around their turnaround, preparedness, and work processes. Their site leadership got actively engaged in evaluating the projects they were trying to execute, and they looked at it from a stage gate perspective relative to turnaround. So if they didn't reach a certain level of project definition at T minus 9 months, they said they were going to defer those projects until a later event or a later opportunity. They really wanted to focus on their project improvement in terms of their project work processes, reorganizing the project organization, and they wanted to really inform some integration efforts. And those were focused on collaborating early and defining project definition, ensuring that there's efficient handover of IFCs. There was comprehensive integrated contracting solutions around construction during the event, and not just okay, well, the project group will have their contractors, the turnaround group will have their contractors, independent schedules, et cetera, et cetera. They went to an integrated planning, scheduling, and execution model, construction model. So the outcomes were they had a similar sized event, but significantly less capital. They had a very large portfolio that they were considering, but site leadership stepped in at the T-9 mark. They realized that the organization, the site project organization, was overwhelmed, and they did not want to accept that risk into the event. So they deferred half their projects. They focused on the most value-driven projects that had solid project readiness. And here's the outcomes. They achieved a top quartile schedule that was 9 days faster than industry. They achieved a second quartile cost schedule that was $14 million better than industry. And they were fully predictable. So they came within 6% on their schedule, 3% of their cost. If you just look at these two turnarounds, the delta relative to industry, 21 additional production days, $44 million direct cost reduction. So my challenge to teams that say we have to have those projects, and in certain cases, that is the case. But from a discretionary perspective, would you have gotten the payback if you'd included this analysis of 21 additional production days, $44 million in cost reduction? Likely that is not going to be the case. And so those decisions saved a significant amount of money for that organization. So it can be done. It is a journey. It doesn't take no work and fairy dust. This organization was really, really driven, and they did an excellent job that realized real money and real savings. So what is it that AP Networks can help with? So we've talked previously about the ITAP series. So we can look at T-minus 24 months all the way in to ensure that we get all of the projects aligned correctly. And the goal in all of this is to ensure that we get all of our projects achieving those aligned timelines, meeting the right milestones, so that way optimally construction can all take place as efficiently as possible in the event. I'm going to talk through a little bit of these tools and benchmarking capabilities that we have on the left-hand side on the next slide. So what is it that we can provide? We provide turnaround scope indices for turnarounds and for turnaround-related scope for a long time. We can do the same thing for capital projects. So we can look at how intensive is the scope for the type of project, what are the cost, schedule, and labor hour targets associated with those projects. And if you're not looking at, if you're not asking AP Networks to do that, generally speaking, projects have these types of targets provided by another provider. So whether or not AP Networks does it, it's still another data point that turnaround professionals can use to understand how aggressive is the project organization trying to be in delivering their portfolio of projects. We do have work process deployment tools on the capital project side. So we can ensure that you have the right agreement and commitment to delivering things on time. So we do have NaviTrack for capital projects. We have other tools and work process deployment tools that can help with that. Ensuring that you have the right evaluation tools and that you're setting up your integration strategies correctly to begin with are important. So if you do that internally, again, we've helped build these for companies. We've helped build specific tools that help specifically around integration. If there are questions about what size organization you should have on the project side or just for your portfolio of projects associated with an event, we have benchmarking for resources on the project side as well, both in FEL and for execution, detailed engineering and construction. Finally, we can look at a lot of different event scenarios and risk profiles that will help inform better decision making. So we've done this just utilizing our risk managers. We have a project risk manager in addition to event risk manager or turnaround risk managers. So we have these capabilities on the project side that can help inform and improve the likelihood of success. Okay, so at this point in time, we've talked through a number of different areas. And so I'll just conclude with Project readiness, turnaround readiness, and coming together in the form of integration are all required to deliver successful events. Projects within a turnaround have unique requirements that do require work process modification. They require education and collaboration with the turnaround group to help meet the right level of readiness. And it is different than a greenfield or run and maintain project. Vertical alignment within the project organization is critical, and that is a main source of degrading project readiness associated with these events at this point in time. So it's not just working directly with your project manager, it's also engaging with those different levels of the project organization to come together. And any deferred decisions or any lack of organizational alignment can lead to scope prioritization delays, and project delays introduce risk into the event. Integration is a challenge within industry. Some companies have started to really get a lot more consistent in figuring it out. But if you're beginning your journey, there may be some positivity bias up front. And so really spending time to make sure that organizations aren't talking past each other and they're working hard to collaborate is very important. And finally, ensure that you're using the right tools and you're interfacing at the right levels of the organization. So make sure that those status updates, make sure that those cross-functional team meetings always have the right people, that you're highlighting the right risks, that you're able to escalate challenges as necessary, so that way you can get to the right event outcomes. And if you do these things and work in these areas, I have a lot of confidence that you're going to build a good organization that can deliver real value. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today. And now I'll open it up to any questions. Thank you.